My name is Kora Clark. I am 28 years old. This past Saturday, I stood in my parents' kitchen and realized I was a ghost in my own family. For 3 days straight, I had been a one-woman catering crew for my sister Madison's 30th birthday party. 50 guests, a full weekend of demands, and not a single hour of sleep. My nights were interrupted by texts about organic eggs and keto-friendly appetizers. By Saturday afternoon, my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped a tray of crystal flutes. When I finally found my mother and begged for 20 minutes of help to finish the main course, she didn't just say no. She laughed. It was a light, melodic sound that cut deeper than any shout. Then, in a room full of Madison's high-powered colleagues, she patted my cheek. "Honey, you're the only one here without a real job. You have the time. Madison is actually building something." What my mother didn't know was that while I was scrubbing her guest bathrooms, I had just signed a contract worth more than Madison makes in a year at her prestigious law firm. And what none of them realized, not my father, not my perfect sister, was that my new CEO was standing 10 feet away in the living room, nursing a gin and tonic and listening to every word of my humiliation. Before I tell you what happened when I set down the silver tongs, stripped off my apron, and walked out that front door, you need to understand how the silent architect of the Clark family finally reached her breaking point. It all started 2 weeks ago with a text that arrived at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. There was no, "How are you?" It was simply, "Madison's birthday is coming up. She's swamped, so you'll handle the hosting. 50 guests, 3-day itinerary. I'll send the menu tonight." I stared at my phone in my dark studio apartment, where 3 monitors were glowing with a brand identity concept for Meridian Corporation. I had been working 16-hour days for a month. This wasn't just a project, it was a global rebranding, the kind of work that defines a career. But in the Clark family hierarchy, my work was flexible. To them, working from home was just a polite way of saying I was unemployed. I tried to push back. I typed, "Mom, I'm in the middle of a massive project. Can we hire a caterer?" Her response came instantly. "Sweetie, don't be difficult. Madison is in court all week. This is a crucial networking event for her. You have the flexibility. This is what family does." There it was. Flexibility. It was a guilt trip that meant my time was worth less than Madison's. It didn't matter that my little freelance projects paid my rent and then some. In their eyes, if I wasn't wearing a suit in a mahogany office, I wasn't actually working. I was just creative, which was their code for unproductive. This pattern was the architecture of my life. At Madison's law school graduation, I designed 200 bespoke programs, hand-pressed the gold foil, and spent 48 hours arranging 5-foot floral centerpieces. At the reception, I heard my father tell his friends, "Madison organized the whole thing herself while studying for the bar. She's just so capable." When I mentioned I'd actually done the labor, my mother just smiled tightly. "Well, you had the time to help her, didn't you, Kora? It's not like you were in court." So, like always, I folded. I accepted the 3-page grocery list. I accepted the role of the invisible engine. I told myself I could manage the Meridian project in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn. I didn't realize that this time, the practical daughter was being asked to build a stage for her own execution. By Wednesday morning, I was at the first of 4 grocery stores by 6 a.m., checking avocados while my mind was miles away, obsessing over Meridian's mobile interface. My life had become a high-stakes split screen. On one side was the flexible daughter, who knew how to chill 50 shrimp cocktails to the perfect temperature. On the other was the professional prodigy, being courted by the largest agency in the country. I returned to my parents' house and set up my mobile office on the breakfast nook table. I had 4 hours to finalize a presentation before a Zoom call on Thursday. My mother walked through, glancing at my 3 monitors and the design sketches. She sighed. "Kora, please. Try not to clutter the kitchen. Madison wants everything elegant. If those computers are still here when the guests arrive, it's going to look like a dorm room." Mom, this isn't an art phase, I said, my voice tight. This is a billion-dollar rebranding pitch. I have a call with the Meridian board tomorrow for a $240,000 contract. She didn't even stop walking. She just reached for a yogurt and laughed. 240,000? Oh, sweetie. I love your imagination. Just make sure the bathrooms are cleaned before Friday. The cleaning lady canceled. She hadn't heard a word. She processed the amount as a joke because it didn't fit her framework of what I was capable of. To her, I was just the girl who could always help. Thursday afternoon was a fever dream. I was in my parents' den, door locked, wearing a professional blazer over yoga pants, presenting to the Meridian board. In the kitchen, 20 pounds of pork were braising. On my screen, Christopher Hayes, the CEO of Meridian, appeared. He was a man with a reputation for being a shark, sharp and unforgiving. Ms. Clark, he finally said. This isn't just a rebrand. This is a psychological shift. It's exceptional work. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, I said, my heart hammering. I'm going to be in your city this weekend, he continued. Robert Clark is an old friend of mine. He mentioned his daughter is having a big 30th. I'd like to meet in person on Sunday to finalize your contract. Family comes first, after all. I'm sure you'll be busy celebrating your sister on Saturday. The room seemed to tilt. Robert Clark. My father. My father and the man about to pay me $250,000 were old college friends. And my father had invited him, not to meet the brilliant designer, but to watch the capable girl serve the successful daughter. Small world, I managed to say. Indeed, Hayes replied. I'll see you then, Kora. I sat in the silence of the den, the secret pressing down on me. I had 48 hours to keep the silent architect hidden while serving the people who dismissed her. I walked back into the kitchen. I was managing a global brand launch on one phone and being yelled at about organic eggs on the other. Christopher Hayes was coming to this house, and he was about to walk into a performance he wasn't supposed to see. Friday night was a blur. I prepped food for 50 people entirely alone. My parents and Madison were upstairs, laughing over wine. Nobody offered me a glass of water. I worked until 3 a.m., my back aching, my eyes burning. Saturday morning, 7 a.m. I was back at it, chopping vegetables. Madison came downstairs at 10 a.m. in silk pajamas. She looked at the menu and frowned. Kora, I forgot. 3 of my colleagues are keto now. Can you pivot the main course? And the senior partner needs decaf espresso. It's a whole thing. Madison, I've already prepped the lasagna, I said, my voice raspy. I've been up since 6. I know, but you're so creative, she said, patting my shoulder. Just improvise. You have the time. I have to go get my hair done. This party has to be perfect, Kora. My entire future depends on this review. She walked out, leaving me with a sinking realization. Her future was a partnership review. My future was a billion-dollar contract. Both were happening in this house, but only one was being treated as real. The guests were arriving in 4 hours. Christopher Hayes would be among them. As I reached for the keto ingredients, I realized I wasn't just cooking dinner. I was preparing evidence for a trial my family didn't even know they were on. The silent architect was done being silent. The most dangerous person in the room is the one they never bothered to look at. I checked my phone one last time. An email from Hayes' assistant. Mr. Hayes is looking forward to the meeting. He's curious to see the Clarks in their natural habitat. I tucked the phone into my apron. He was going to see exactly how this family functioned. For the first time, I wasn't going to hide it. I was going to let the foundation give way. The Zoom call with Meridian had been the peak of my professional life, but by Saturday at 2 p.m., the professional prodigy had vanished. I was replaced by the sauce-stained servant. The transformation was complete. I was wearing an old t-shirt and an apron that had seen 3 different types of marinade. My hair was yanked into a bun that felt like it was holding my skull together. Outside the kitchen door, the hum of high society chatter had begun. Madison's colleagues were arriving in waves of expensive perfume and tailored linen. The Thursday Zoom call haunted me with every dish I scrubbed. Christopher Hayes was out there. I hadn't seen him yet, but I recognized his deep laugh in the collective roar of the living room. I was trapped in a marathon that felt like it had no finish line. The keto crisis had sent me on a frantic dash to the specialty grocer at noon, and now I was behind on the shrimp skewers. Madison swept into the kitchen, her silk dress rustling, a sharp, expensive sound that set my teeth on edge. "Kora, the skewers?" "Mrs. Patterson is already on her second glass of Chardonnay. We need the appetizers now." "I'm working as fast as I can, Madison," I said, my voice tight. The cleaning lady didn't show, so I had to scrub the guest bath before I could start the reduction. "Well, you're so fast at that stuff," she said, checking her reflection in the stainless steel toaster. "Just power through." "Oh, and Mom said to make sure you use the silver trays, not the wood ones. We want this to look professional, not like a Pinterest board." She didn't ask if I'd eaten. She didn't ask about the Meridian contract. She just adjusted a diamond earring and vanished back into the fray. I was a ghost in the hallway, moving through the crowd with trays of bruschetta, invisible to everyone except for their outstretched hands. At 4:15 p.m., my phone vibrated. I was in the walk-in pantry, the only place I could find 10 seconds of silence. It was Sarah Chen, Hayes' assistant. "Miss Clark, Mr. Hayes has reviewed the final fee structure. He's prepared to move forward with the full $240,000 contract, plus a monthly retainer. He has the hard copy with him today. He mentioned he's looking forward to seeing your creative process in person." I leaned my head against a shelf of canned tomatoes and let out a jagged breath. $250,000. It was more than my parents' combined annual income. It was more than Madison's billables for the entire quarter. And yet, 3 minutes later, my mother's voice rang out from the living room, cutting through the music like a siren. "Kora, the napkins in the powder room are low. And could you bring out more of the Sauvignon Blanc? We're parched." The dismissal happened just as I was emerging from the cellar with a case of wine. I ran right into Sarah Bennett, a senior partner at Madison's firm. She was a kind-faced woman who actually took the time to look at me. "Oh, hello," she said, smiling warmly. "Are you the caterer? This spread is absolutely divine. That reduction on the pork is world-class." "I'm actually Madison's sister, Kora," I said, trying to stand a little straighter despite the apron. "I'm a brand identity designer. I did the catering as a family favor." "A designer?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "How fascinating. I've been looking for someone to help with our firm's internal." "Oh, Sarah," my mother intervened, sweeping in. She draped an arm over Sarah's shoulder, physically turning her away from me. "Don't let Kora bore you with her little art projects. She's our resident free spirit. She has so much flexibility with her freelance work that she practically lives in our kitchen. We're so lucky she has the time to help Madison while Madison does the real heavy lifting at the firm." I stood there, a bottle of wine in each hand, watching Sarah's expression shift to polite, distant pity. "How nice," Sarah murmured, her gaze sliding off me as if I were a piece of furniture. "It must be wonderful to have such a relaxing schedule." My mother laughed. "Oh, it is. We keep telling her she'll grow out of it and get a real job eventually, but for now, she's our little kitchen angel." I felt the heat rise in my neck, a slow-burning fuse of resentment. They were rewriting my life in real time, turning my expertise into a hobby and my labor into leisure. I retreated to the kitchen, my heart hammering. I needed to plate the prime rib. I needed to stay professional. But the next encounter was about to shatter whatever was left of my composure. I was at the stove, deglazing the pan with a splash of red wine, when the back door opened. I didn't turn around, assuming it was the trash valet. Just leave the bins by the gate, I muttered, not looking up. I imagine the brand guidelines for Meridian require a bit more focus than a roast, Miss Clark. The voice was unmistakable. Deep, resonant, and entirely too composed for a kitchen filled with steam and grease. I turned, and there he was. Christopher Hayes. He was leaning against the center island, his sharp suit a jarring contrast to the cluttered countertops and the stack of 50 dirty plates. He wasn't looking at the food. He was looking at me. Mr. Hayes, I stammered, instinctively trying to wipe a smudge of flour off my forehead. I'm sorry. I'd been standing in the living room for 20 minutes, Kora, he said quietly. He didn't look offended, he looked observant. I've heard your mother explain your art phase to 3 different people. I've heard your sister refer to your office as Pajama Land. And I've watched you work this room like a professional who is being treated like an intern. It's just family, I said, the words feeling thin. They don't really understand the scope of the Meridian project. Then they aren't paying attention, Hayes replied. He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto mine with terrifying intensity. Because I don't hire free spirits for $200,000 contracts. I hire architects. And from what I've seen today, you are the only person in this house actually managing a crisis. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the chaos of the kitchen. You shouldn't have to prove yourself in your own home, Kora. But if you're going to build a kingdom, you eventually have to stop serving at someone else's table. The scent of burning meat hit me a second too late. I gasped, turning back to the oven, but the damage was done. The edges of the 20-pound roast were charred black. I'd been so distracted by the collision of my 2 worlds that I'd missed the timer. Kora. Madison's voice shrieked from the doorway. She didn't see Hayes at first, she only saw the smoke. What is that smell? Mrs. Patterson has theater tickets. If that meat isn't on the table in 5 minutes, my review is over. She stormed toward me, her face contorted with stress. Why can't you do one simple thing right? You have all the time in the world, and you still manage to. She stopped dead as she realized the CEO of Meridian Corporation was standing 3 feet away, watching her. The silence that followed was a live wire, and I was the only one holding the insulation. Madison froze. Her hand, raised to point a manicured finger at the smoking oven, stayed suspended in midair. The abrasive tone she reserved for the help vanished, replaced by a horrified gasp. She knew exactly who Christopher Hayes was. He wasn't just a guest. He was the white whale her firm had been trying to harpoon for 3 years. Mr. Hayes, she stammered, her face turning from blotchy red to waxen pale. I didn't realize you were in the kitchen. My sister, she's just a bit overwhelmed. You know how creative types are with a schedule. She laughed, a brittle, desperate sound. She was still trying to maintain the public dismissal while smoke from the ruined roast curled around her designer dress. She performed a frantic dance of damage control, unaware that the man she was trying to impress had just called her a manager of a crisis, with pure irony. I've spent the last 20 minutes observing your sister's creativity, Madison, Hayes said, his voice as cold as a marble floor. And I have to say, her ability to multitask under this kind of hospitality is a revelation. He didn't wait for a response. He turned back to me, ignoring the smoke and the sister vibrating with anxiety. Monday morning, Kora. 9 a.m. Don't be late. We have a kingdom to build. He gave a sharp nod and walked out the back door, leaving the kitchen in a silence so thick you could taste it. Madison didn't move for 10 seconds. Then, she lunged for the oven. Do you have any idea what you just did? She hissed. That was Christopher Hayes. If he tells the partners this party was a disaster. I'm never making partner. Why were you talking to him? What did he mean, Monday morning? He's my client, Madison, I said, my voice finally finding its center. I picked up the carving knife, my movements slow and deliberate. And he's right. I've been managing your crisis all day. But I'm done being the ghost in the hallway. I began to carve the meat, slicing away the blackened crust to reveal the perfect center. It was a metaphor for my life. Something beautiful hidden under a layer of burnt expectations. I didn't look at her, I didn't need to. I could hear her shallow, panicked breathing. "Client," she whispered, as if speaking a foreign language. "Kora, don't be ridiculous. He's a billionaire. He doesn't hire freelancers who live in one-bedroom apartments." "He doesn't hire freelancers," I agreed, setting a perfect slice on the silver platter. "He hires architects. And he just offered me a $240,000 contract to rebrand his empire." The reveal hit her harder than a physical blow. She stumbled back, hitting a stack of appetizer plates. The clatter was deafening. 240. "Kora, that's more than my base salary." "I know," I said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Mrs. Patterson has theater tickets. We wouldn't want to ruin your perfect night." I walked past her, carrying the prime rib into the dining room. The guests were a sea of silk and wool. I saw my father at the head of the table, puffing his chest out as he told a story about his old friend Chris. I saw my mother directing a server as if she'd been in the trenches all day. I set the meat down to a chorus of approval. My father beamed at me like I was a successful appliance. "Kora, honey, you've outdone yourself. The art phase really helps with the presentation, doesn't it?" A few people chuckled. My mother leaned over to the woman next to her. "She's so flexible with her time. We're lucky she could fit this in between her little sketches." I stood at the edge of the table, hands still stained from the kitchen, and looked at Christopher Hayes. He sat next to my father, his expression unreadable. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't eating. He was waiting. 10 minutes later, I was back in the kitchen when my mother burst through the door. "Kora. Mrs. Patterson needs a decaf espresso. Not the pods, the real thing. And Mr. Wilson wants a specific latte from the Starbucks on 5th. It's 10 minutes away. Take my car." "Mom, I haven't eaten since 6 a.m., I said, my voice barely a whisper. "And the dishes. I still have to plate the dessert." "Madison will handle the dessert," she said, her mask finally slipping. "This is important, Kora. These are Madison's future colleagues. Don't be selfish. You have the time. Madison is out there networking. Now, go. And try to look more presentable before you come back." She threw the keys on the counter. They skidded across the granite, hitting my phone, which was glowing with a welcome to the team email from Meridian's HR department. I looked at the keys. I looked at the sink full of grease. And then I looked at the dining room door, where Madison's desperate laughter was rising over the clink of silverware. The fuse had reached the powder. I didn't grab the keys. I grabbed the apron ties at my waist. "No," I said. My mother froze. "Excuse me?" I said no, I repeated, standing up. I felt the exhaustion vanish, replaced by a cold fury. I'm not going to Starbucks. I'm not plating the dessert. And I'm certainly not going to power through so Madison can pretend she didn't spend the last hour belittling me to a man who is currently paying for my new apartment. "Kora, you're being dramatic." "I'm being an architect, Mom," I said, pulling the apron over my head and dropping it onto the floor. "And an architect doesn't serve coffee to people who think her life is a hobby." I walked past her, straight through the swinging doors and into the dining room. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward me. The silent architect had entered the room, and she wasn't carrying a tray. She was carrying the truth. The swinging door didn't just open, it hit the stopper with a crack that silenced the room. I stood there, no longer the invisible ghost, but a woman whose presence demanded the space. My hair was a mess, my shirt was stained with wine reduction, and adrenaline was the only thing keeping my knees from buckling. My father looked up from his prime rib. "Kora? Where's the coffee?" Mrs. Patterson was just saying. Mrs. Patterson can wait, I said, my voice steady in the dead silence. I walked to the head of the table and laid my phone face up on the white linen. The screen was glowing with the Meridian contract. Kora, honey, don't be difficult, my mother said, her voice a nervous flutter as she tried to catch the eyes of the guests. She's just a little tired from all the flexibility of her schedule. You know how art projects can be. It's not an art project, Mom, I said, looking directly at Madison. My sister stared at the phone like it was a live grenade. It's a brand identity contract for Meridian Corporation. Since everyone here is so interested in real jobs, I thought you'd like to know the valuation. It's $240,000. Just for the first phase. A low murmur rippled through the room. Madison's colleagues, the ones she'd spent all night trying to impress, were looking at the phone, then at me, then at the star attorney, who had been calling me her pajama-clad assistant 10 minutes ago. 240, my father whispered, his brain finally processing a number that didn't fit his little freelance narrative. Actually, Christopher Hayes said, standing up and smoothing his jacket. He didn't look at my father. He addressed the room. The total project value exceeds $400,000. Kora is the lead architect of our global relaunch. I flew here specifically to sign her. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the table. My mother's face went from a performative flush to a ghostly white. She looked at the Starbucks keys she'd thrown on the counter, keys she'd expected me to use to fetch a $5 latte while I was managing a $500,000 account. Kora, I didn't realize, Madison stammered, her eyes darting to Mrs. Patterson, who was watching the scene with the cold gaze of a senior partner. We were just trying to include you. We thought you wanted to help. No, Madison, I said, leaning over the table. You didn't want to include me. You wanted to use me. You wanted the flexibility of my labor to build the stage for your success, while you mocked the work that pays for the very life I lead. You wanted a servant who shared your last name. Now, see here, my father started, his instinct for defense kicking in. There's no need for this display in front of guests. There's every need, Dad, I replied. Because you've spent 28 years looking at me and seeing a hobby. You've spent tonight explaining to your important friends why I'm a free spirit who can't hold a real job. Well, here's the reality, my hobby is currently the most successful venture in this house. I picked up my phone and looked at the 50 guests. I apologize for the disruption, I said, my voice professional and cold. The dessert is in the fridge. The coffee is in the pot. You are all highly capable professionals. I'm sure you can figure out how to serve yourselves. I turned to Christopher Hayes. I'll see you Monday at 9, Mr. Hayes. I have a kingdom to build. I walked out of the dining room. I didn't run. I walked through the kitchen, grabbed my laptop bag, and headed for the front door. Behind me, I could hear the fallout, the frantic whispers, my mother's sobs, and Madison's desperate attempt to apologize to Mrs. Patterson. As I reached the door, a hand touched my shoulder. It was Madison. Her makeup was ruined by tears, and her poise was gone. Kora, please, she whispered. Mrs. Patterson, she just told me she's concerned about my leadership if I can't even manage my own family. You're ruining everything. No, Madison, I said, opening the door to the cool night air. I'm just finally resigning. Find someone else to be your silent architect. I stepped out into the dark. My car was waiting. My office was waiting. My life was finally, for the first time, entirely my own. I hit confirm on the contract from my phone before I even started the engine. The Clark family's natural habitat was about to get a lot more quiet. The front door didn't just close behind me, it sealed off a lifetime of being the flexible daughter. Standing on the driveway, the cool Seattle air felt like a physical weight lifting off my chest. I could still hear the muffled chaos from inside, the sharp clink of a dropped glass, my mother's voice hitting a note of pure panic, and the low, judgmental hum of guests who had just witnessed the Clark facade crumble. I didn't wait for a second act. I didn't wait for my father to chase me down with a lecture on family loyalty, or for Madison to beg me to fix her reputation. I got into my car and sat there for a single, shaking breath. I looked at the house, the warm, amber glow of the windows and the perfectly manicured lawn. It was the architectural symbol of a life I had built for them while they tore mine down. I pulled up the email from Sarah Chin on my phone. With one tap, I didn't just sign a contract, I resigned from my family. The fallout happened while I was sitting in my dark apartment, staring at the city lights. I didn't need to be there to know how it went down. Aunt Susan called me, her voice a mix of awe and terror. The party hadn't just ended, it had imploded. Mrs. Patterson had left without finishing her prime rib, citing leadership concerns that made Madison's face turn the color of ash. But the real blow came 3 hours later. A private courier knocked on my parents' door at nearly midnight. My mother, still in her ruined silk dress, opened it to find a heavy envelope embossed with the Meridian Corporation logo. It wasn't a thank you note. It was a formal notice of professional standing. Hayes had delivered a copy of my signed executive contract, but the cover letter was the final wrecking ball. He had written, "Robert, it was a pleasure to briefly reconnect. However, I cannot in good conscience overlook the environment in which my brand director was expected to perform today. Excellence in unconventional forms often makes us question our own assumptions. I hope you find the time to question yours." The reveal wasn't just my salary, it was the total loss of the standard they lived by. My father, a man who valued titles above all else, had to read a letter from a billionaire peer telling him he was professionally blind. Madison, the star lawyer, had to watch as her own mentor postponed her partnership review indefinitely. The flexible daughter was the only one with a solid foundation left. 6 weeks later, I stood in my new office at Meridian. It wasn't a breakfast nook or a pajama land studio. It was a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the bay. My name wasn't on a grocery list, it was on the door. I'd gone no contact for those 6 weeks, ignoring the flurry of apologetic voicemails and the desperate family dinner invites. Success, I realized, was the only boundary they respected. Madison's partnership was still on ice. She was reportedly taking leadership coaching just to keep her associate desk. My parents had started therapy, finally forced to confront why they'd spent 28 years treating one daughter like a star and the other like a servant. I looked at a framed photo on my desk, not of my family, but of the Meridian brand boards I'd designed in the middle of that hellish weekend. I realized then that I was never the silent architect, because I was shy. I was the architect because I knew how to build a world that could stand even when the people around me tried to knock it down. I hit the send button on a global press release, my face reflecting in the glass. The Clark family's natural habitat was finally quiet, but my world was just getting loud. I didn't look back. I had a kingdom to run.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe Family Files for more.